My family invited me to what they called a celebration at the city's most expensive restaurant. By the end of the night, they had forced me to pay for a luxury dinner I never agreed to, laughed while I stood there humiliated, and believed they had finally put me in my place. What they didn't know was that before sunrise, every business they relied on would belong to me. Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. Please stick with me, because what happened next completely changed my family's lives forever. My name is Rowan, and for as long as I could remember, I had been the forgotten daughter. My parents, Vernon and Elise, always found reasons to criticize me while praising my younger sister, Bria. Every family gathering revolved around her achievements, especially after she became engaged to Nolan Mercer, whose family carried wealth, influence, and political connections. I was expected to smile, stay quiet, and never outshine anyone. A week before the engagement celebration, my parents unexpectedly invited me to an extravagant dinner at the city's finest restaurant. They insisted they wanted the whole family together before the wedding preparations became overwhelming. Part of me knew better, but another part hoped this invitation meant they were finally ready to treat me like family. When I arrived, they barely acknowledged me. Bria and Nolan were welcomed like celebrities while I sat silently, realizing something about the evening felt carefully planned. Still, I stayed, believing one peaceful dinner might finally heal years of disappointment. The evening became more uncomfortable with every passing minute. As soon as everyone settled into their seats, Bria insisted they should celebrate properly and encouraged the table to order whatever they wanted. Expensive steaks, fresh seafood, imported desserts, and bottles of premium wine quickly covered the table. No one seemed concerned about the cost. Rowan quietly ordered a simple meal, hoping to avoid drawing attention to herself. Instead of enjoying the dinner, Vernon and Elise spent the evening comparing their daughters. They praised Bria for marrying into the respected Mercer family and spoke excitedly about the influential people she would soon meet. Whenever Rowan tried to join the conversation, someone interrupted her or changed the subject. Her opinions were ignored as though she wasn't sitting there. At one point, Vernon laughed loudly and declared that life rewarded people who aimed high, while others were simply meant to stand on the sidelines and watch success belong to someone else. Several guests at nearby tables glanced over, making Rowan feel even smaller. She forced a polite smile and stayed quiet because she refused to create a scene during what was supposed to be a family celebration. When the meal finally ended, the waiter placed the check on the table. Rowan expected everyone to split the bill or at least discuss it. Instead, the conversation stopped. One by one, every member of her family looked directly at her with knowing smiles. Vernon casually slid the check across the table and said that since Rowan had no husband, no children, and plenty of money from having no real life, she could pay for everyone's dinner as Bria's engagement gift. Rowan took a slow breath and looked at the check before gently sliding it back across the table. She calmly explained that she had only expected to pay for her own meal and thought everyone else would cover their own expenses. Her words were polite, but they immediately changed the mood. Vernon frowned and accused her of being selfish. Elise shook her head in disappointment, saying Rowan had always found a way to embarrass the family during important moments. Bria's expression quickly changed as tears filled her eyes. She softly claimed that all she wanted was one happy celebration before her wedding, yet her own sister couldn't even do this one kind thing for her. Nolan leaned back in his chair with a smug grin and sarcastically asked if Rowan needed to borrow money from him. His comment made the rest of the table laugh, and several nearby diners turned to watch the uncomfortable scene. The attention from strangers made Rowan's face burn with embarrassment. She realized her family had planned this from the beginning. They weren't asking for help, they wanted to humiliate her in public. Not wanting the situation to become even uglier, she quietly reached for her wallet and handed over her credit card. As the payment processed, Vernon smiled with satisfaction and loudly announced that Rowan had finally contributed something meaningful to the family. The words stung more than the bill itself. Rowan accepted the receipt, thanked the waiter for his professionalism, and calmly walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Behind her, her family laughed together, convinced they had won and that Rowan would never stand up to them. Rowan stepped outside the restaurant and took a deep breath as the cool night air replaced the noise inside. She walked to her car, closed the door, and sat in complete silence. The laughter from her family still echoed in her mind. Every insult, every mocking smile, and every word they had spoken replayed over and over. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel the hurt. Then she wiped away the disappointment and reached for her phone. There would be no tears tonight. She dialed a number from memory. The call was answered almost immediately by her financial director, who greeted her with quiet professionalism. Rowan calmly instructed him to begin reviewing several business agreements first thing the following morning. There was no need to explain further. He already understood what she meant and assured her that every contract, report, and legal file had been organized and was ready whenever she gave the final approval. For years, Rowan had quietly built a respected private investment firm without attaching her name to it. She preferred privacy over recognition, allowing others to underestimate her while she expanded her business behind the scenes. Very few people knew she controlled the debt financing for dozens of successful companies across the region. Among those businesses were several owned by the Mercer family and even companies connected to her own relatives. As she ended the call, Rowan stared through the windshield. This wasn't about revenge fueled by anger. It was about ending years of silent sacrifice. She had spent too long protecting people who had never respected her, and tonight she finally decided they would face the consequences of their own choices. The following morning, Rowan arrived at a financial conference she had planned to attend weeks earlier. Despite everything that had happened the night before, she remained focused and professional. The event brought together investors, business owners, and executives from across the region. Because Rowan preferred to keep a low profile, very few people recognized her or understood the influence she quietly held in the financial world. During a private luncheon, respected technology entrepreneur Grant Hale looked across the room and immediately recognized her. Without a second thought, he stood, walked over, and greeted her with genuine respect. Smiling warmly, he thanked Rowan for believing in his company years earlier when banks and investors had turned him away. He admitted that her private funding had allowed his business to survive its hardest period and eventually become one of the industry's biggest success stories. Several executives nearby watched with surprise as Grant spoke so highly of someone they barely knew. He asked Rowan if he could introduce her to a few important investors, calling her one of the smartest financial minds he had ever worked with. Rowan accepted politely but remained humble, giving credit to her experienced team instead of seeking attention. As their conversation continued, Grant mentioned he had recently reviewed several financial reports connected to the Mercer family businesses as well as companies owned by Rowan's relatives. He explained that the numbers concerned him because multiple loans were approaching critical deadlines. His comment immediately caught Rowan's attention. She realized the process she had started the previous night was already gaining momentum, and the consequences her family never expected might arrive much sooner than anyone imagined. After the luncheon ended, Grant invited Rowan into a quiet meeting room where they could speak privately. Once the door closed, his expression became serious. He explained that while reviewing several financial reports, he had noticed a troubling pattern involving both the Mercer family businesses and the companies owned by Rowan's relatives. They had borrowed heavily over the years, repeatedly requesting deadline extensions because they believed the anonymous investment firm behind the loans would always give them more time. Grant looked at Rowan and reminded her that neither family had any idea she was the person making those decisions. They assumed the investor was simply another wealthy corporation that could be persuaded to wait. What they never realized was that Rowan had personally approved every extension, hoping to protect her family from financial hardship despite the way they treated her. Rowan listened quietly before admitting that she had ignored business principles for personal reasons. She had convinced herself that showing patience might eventually repair the relationship with her family. Instead, they had continued to insult and use her without appreciation. The humiliation at the restaurant had finally opened her eyes. Grant encouraged her not to let guilt influence another decision. He advised her to allow the legal and financial teams to handle every agreement exactly as the contracts required. Rowan nodded in agreement. She contacted her legal department and instructed them to move forward with standard enforcement procedures, giving no special treatment and asking for no unnecessary penalties. Every borrower would simply be expected to honor the commitments they had willingly signed. For the first time in years, Rowan chose self-respect over endless sacrifice, knowing fairness was not cruelty, it was accountability. Over the next several days, the first signs of trouble quietly appeared. Formal financial notices arrived at the offices of both the Mercer family and Rowan's relatives. Lenders requested updated documentation, scheduled reviews were moved forward, and outstanding obligations that had been overlooked for months suddenly required immediate attention. Lenders began asking about delayed payments, while banks postponed important meetings until financial records could be verified. Vernon dismissed every warning as a temporary problem. He insisted the economy was creating unnecessary pressure and assured everyone that things would return to normal within a few weeks. Elise believed their long-standing relationships would smooth everything over, just as they always had before. Neither of them imagined that someone had simply stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own decisions. Across town, the Mercer family faced similar difficulties. Plans for a major business expansion stalled without clear answers, leaving executives frustrated and confused. Important approvals were delayed, and expected funding never arrived. Nolan tried to remain confident, telling Bria that wealthy families always found solutions. Bria focused on wedding preparations, convinced nothing could possibly threaten the future she had imagined. Throughout it all, Rowan remained completely silent. She never called her parents, never contacted the Mercers, and never celebrated the difficulties they were facing. She continued attending meetings, reviewing investments, and managing her company with the same calm professionalism she always had. The legal process moved forward exactly as planned, without personal interference. For the first time, her family couldn't escape responsibility through excuses, influence, or empty promises. Their choices were finally catching up with them, and the system they had always taken for granted was no longer bending in their favor. As the weeks passed, the financial pressure became impossible to ignore. Vernon spent nearly every day calling banks, lenders, and business contacts, trying to identify the private investment company that controlled their largest debts. Every request for a meeting received the same polite response. The agreements would be handled according to the existing contracts, and no exceptions could be promised. His frustration grew with each unanswered question. The Mercer family faced the same obstacle. Their attorneys carefully reviewed every document but found no legal mistakes or loopholes that could delay the process. They were stunned to discover that millions of dollars depended on the decisions of one anonymous investment firm that had remained hidden for years. Accustomed to influence and powerful connections, they couldn't believe someone had quietly gained so much control over their financial future. At home, the pressure created constant arguments. Instead of accepting responsibility, Bria looked for someone else to blame. She convinced herself that everything had started falling apart because Rowan had left the restaurant angry after the dinner. She accused her sister of bringing bad luck to the family and claimed things would have been different if Rowan had simply acted like a supportive sister. Rowan never responded to the accusations. She refused to defend herself or reveal what she knew. While others imagined she was enjoying their struggles, the truth was very different. Watching her own family fall apart brought her no happiness. She felt disappointed more than anything else. For years, she had hoped they would appreciate her loyalty, respect her as their daughter, and treat her with kindness instead of using her whenever it benefited them. That hope was finally beginning to disappear. After weeks of uncertainty, both the Mercer family and Rowan's relatives received formal invitations to meet with the leadership of the private investment firm overseeing their financial agreements. The meeting was scheduled at the company's headquarters, giving everyone hope that they could finally negotiate new terms. Vernon believed they were about to sit across from another wealthy executive who could be persuaded with promises and personal connections. The Mercer family shared the same confidence as they arrived dressed for an important business negotiation. They were escorted into a large conference room overlooking the city. Financial reports, legal documents, and neatly organized folders were already arranged across the polished table. As they waited, conversations filled the room with quiet confidence. No one imagined what was about to happen. A moment later, the conference room door opened. Rowan walked in carrying the final financial reports with calm professionalism. She greeted the legal team, took her seat at the head of the table, and organized the documents in front of her without looking surprised to see her family. The room fell into complete silence. Vernon stared at her in disbelief, unable to speak. Elise looked from Rowan to the company staff, hoping there had been some mistake. Bria's face lost all color, while Nolan stood frozen beside her. Before anyone could ask a question, Grant Hale entered the room with several executives. He smiled respectfully, shook Rowan's hand, and welcomed everyone by introducing her as the firm's principal decision-maker and lead investor. In that single moment, the truth became impossible to deny. The daughter they had mocked, used, and publicly humiliated was the very person holding the future of both families' businesses in her hands. The silence in the conference room lasted several long seconds before panic replaced confidence. Vernon was the first to speak. His harsh attitude disappeared, replaced by an uneasy smile as he insisted the family had simply experienced a misunderstanding. He reminded Rowan that disagreements happened in every family and said they should not allow one unfortunate dinner to destroy years of shared history. Elise quickly agreed, adding that family members should always forgive one another. Bria lowered her head and wiped away tears. In a trembling voice, she admitted the restaurant dinner had gone too far and said she never intended for Rowan to feel humiliated. Even Nolan, who had laughed the loudest that night, quietly apologized and claimed everyone had been caught up in the excitement of the engagement celebration. Rowan remained calm throughout their apologies. She allowed each person to finish speaking before responding. Looking around the table, she quietly reminded them that when she had been publicly embarrassed in front of a crowded restaurant, not one person had defended her. Instead, they had laughed together because they believed she had no influence and no way to protect herself. Their kindness appeared only after they discovered who she really was. She explained that this meeting was not about revenge or personal anger. Every business represented in the room had voluntarily signed legally binding agreements. Those contracts clearly outlined payment obligations and deadlines. Her company was simply enforcing those terms exactly as written. No special favors would be given, but no unfair punishment would be added either. Before ending her remarks, Rowan calmly said that genuine respect should never depend on someone's wealth, position, or influence. It should be given because every person deserves dignity, long before anyone discovers how powerful they truly are. Instead of taking satisfaction in her family's panic, Rowan focused on finding a fair solution. She explained that her company had no interest in destroying honest businesses. Any company willing to provide complete financial records, cooperate with the review process, and accept responsibility for its obligations would be offered a reasonable restructuring plan. The goal was recovery through accountability, not punishment through revenge. She also made one condition perfectly clear. Any business caught hiding assets, providing false information, or refusing to honor signed agreements would face full legal enforcement without further negotiation. The same standards would apply to everyone, regardless of family ties, reputation, or political influence. The Mercer family immediately rejected the proposal. They believed their powerful connections would eventually pressure the investment firm into changing its position. Confident that influence mattered more than contracts, they refused to cooperate and instructed their attorneys to continue fighting every decision. Vernon responded differently. After reviewing the financial reports, he finally realized how deeply his company had fallen into debt. With little choice left, he admitted responsibility and agreed to the restructuring process. However, years of poor planning, unnecessary spending, and ignored warnings had already caused serious financial damage that could not be erased overnight. Rowan stepped back from the negotiations once the process began. She instructed independent financial advisors and legal professionals to handle every decision without seeking her personal approval. She no longer wanted emotions to shape business judgments. For years she had confused kindness with endless sacrifice, but those days were over. Her greatest achievement wasn't gaining control over her family's future. It was finally learning to establish healthy boundaries, treat everyone fairly, and stop allowing guilt to influence decisions that required wisdom instead of emotion. As the months passed, the financial problems became too serious to hide. The extravagant wedding that Bria had spent months planning slowly unraveled. Luxury venues were cancelled, expensive deposits were lost, and many of the plans that had once seemed certain disappeared one by one. What had been expected to be a grand celebration quietly became another reminder that financial decisions always carried consequences. The stress inside both families grew worse each day. Bria blamed her parents for making promises they could never keep. She argued that they had encouraged her to dream of a perfect future without ever telling her how unstable their finances had become. Vernon, unwilling to admit his own mistakes, shifted the blame to the Mercer family, insisting they should have offered more support instead of protecting only their own interests. Elise refused to accept any responsibility at all. She insisted Rowan could have solved everything with a single signature and repeatedly complained that her oldest daughter had abandoned the family when they needed her most. Even after everything that had happened, she still believed Rowan was responsible for fixing problems she had never created. Hearing these arguments from a distance, Rowan felt a quiet sadness. Not one of them paused to admit their own poor decisions or the years of disrespect that had led to this moment. They continued searching for someone else to blame instead of accepting the truth. That realization finally gave Rowan the peace she had been searching for. She understood she had spent years trying to earn love from people who measured relationships by what they could receive. Rather than chasing their approval again, she chose to walk away from the conflict and build a happier life surrounded by respect instead of constant disappointment. Several months later, Rowan's life looked completely different. With the difficult chapter behind her, she focused her energy on expanding her investment company and creating opportunities for people who genuinely deserved support. Instead of pouring resources into businesses that relied on favoritism or empty promises, she invested in hardworking entrepreneurs with honest ideas and strong values. Watching small businesses succeed because of fair opportunities brought her a sense of purpose that money alone had never provided. Grant Hale remained one of her most trusted professional partners. Their mutual respect grew stronger with every project they completed together. He often told others that Rowan's greatest strength wasn't her financial knowledge but her ability to stay fair even when emotions could have easily influenced her decisions. His confidence in her leadership opened new doors, allowing the company to build partnerships with respected organizations across the country. Outside of work, Rowan slowly built a healthier life. She surrounded herself with friends, colleagues, and mentors who valued her honesty, integrity, and kindness instead of judging her by her status or what she could provide. For the first time, she experienced relationships that were built on trust rather than obligation. Family gatherings no longer filled her with anxiety. If she chose to attend, she did so with confidence instead of seeking approval. She no longer measured her worth by the opinions of people who had repeatedly overlooked her value. Looking back, Rowan realized that losing the constant need for her family's acceptance had become one of the greatest gifts she could have received. She had finally discovered that real freedom begins when self-respect becomes more important than winning the approval of those who never truly appreciated you. Years later, Rowan happened to drive past the same luxury restaurant where her family had once humiliated her in front of strangers. She slowed for a moment and looked at the entrance, remembering the night she had been pressured into paying for a dinner she never agreed to. What had felt like the worst moment of her life had quietly become the turning point that changed everything. Instead of feeling anger, she smiled and continued walking, grateful for the lessons that painful evening had taught her. She never celebrated her family's financial struggles or wished for their lives to fall apart. Time had shown her that revenge by itself could never create lasting happiness. True peace came from letting go of bitterness and refusing to carry old wounds into the future. By choosing fairness instead of cruelty, she had protected not only her business but also her own character. The years that followed were filled with meaningful work, trusted friendships, and a quiet confidence she had never known before. She no longer questioned her worth or chased the approval of people who had measured love by convenience and personal gain. She had built a life based on integrity, respect, and honest relationships, and that success meant far more than wealth alone. Looking back, Rowan realized her family's betrayal had unexpectedly given her the courage to stop settling for less than she deserved. Their rejection forced her to discover strength she never knew she possessed. Sometimes the people who underestimate you become the reason you create a better future than they ever imagined. The greatest response is not endless revenge or a loud celebration. It is living with dignity, succeeding through hard work, and allowing your actions to speak long after the arguments have been forgotten.